Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today I'm going to be using the 4-head gym Pokemon to beat the game. And looking over every Pokemon all the way up through Gen 3, we have Espeon, Persian, Golduck, Slowking, the Tentacruel line, and Ampharos. And the thing about these 6 is that not all of the 4-head gyms are actually made equal, so I wasn't sure which ones to include and which ones not to, and in the end I decided to use them all, because Tentacruel and Tentacruel just light up. Ampharos's does nothing, from what I can tell from the Pokedex entries. It's its tail that lights up. Persian uses its for status, and then Espeon, Golduck, and Slowking all actually use theirs for psychic powers. So after a bit of deliberation, I decided to just go ahead and use all of them, because even though not every single one is made the same or used the same way, I think that they still kind of fit the idea of 4-head gem Pokemon. However, there was one line of Pokemon I decided to leave off, and that is the Starmie line, simply because I don't think it actually has a 4-head. Anyway, with that being said, we now move on to the run, and the first thing I need to do is pick up the Sun Shard to evolve our Eevee into Espeon, and once it does, it'll have 65 HP, 65 attack, 60 defense, 130 special attack, 95 special defense, and 110 speed. And through level up, it gets access to mostly normal and psychic type attacks. However, because we're starting out with our main character's Eevee, it also gets the move Bite, which is really nice because it gives us a special attacking move before it gets Confusion, so that'll make the early game a bit easier. And I forgot to record it, but Espeon has a quirky nature, which is a neutral nature, and it gets access to the Synchronize ability, causing any status effects to afflict it to go back to the attacker as well. Anyway, moving on, of course the first thing we need to do is start assembling our team, and that starts with catching this Poochyena so that we can turn it into our next Pokemon, and catching it really isn't all that hard, though it did take a couple balls to do. And now it's time to spin the wheel to see who we get next, and our second Pokemon will be Ampharos, which it's always nice to have an electric type early on because there are quite a few water types. So let's go ahead and look over its stats. Ampharos has 90 HP, 75 attack, 75 defense, 115 special attack, 90 special defense, and 55 speed, and gets access to a lot of electric type moves, as well as a few normal type moves and access to fighting type moves through TM and Tutor, which could come in handy. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our Ampharos in particular, which has a lonely nature, raising its attack but lowering its defense, which really isn't a great nature, but that should be fine. It gets access to the static ability, which causes all contact moves to have a chance of paralyzing, which does come in handy, and it gets Tackle, Growl, Thundershock, and Thunder Wave by level 10. So with that, we move on, and the next Pokemon we can pick up is the Shadow Ladybug to spin the wheel once again. And so who will we get this time? We get Persian by just a hair. Okay, well, moving on to Persian, it has 65 HP, 70 attack, 60 defense, 65 special attack, 65 special defense, and 115 speed, and through level up it only gets dark and normal type moves. However, through TM and Tutor it gets access to easily gotten water, electric, and ghost type moves, which could all come in handy. But now moving on to our Persian in particular, which has a hardy nature, which is once again a neutral nature, but that's alright. It gets access to the Limber ability, which prevents paralysis, which is really nice, and it has Scratch, Growl, and Bite by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. And Espeon is unfortunately a friendship evolution, so it does take a couple levels to actually get it to evolve, but once it does, we now have Espeon, and I'm going to go ahead and skip the old man fight and instead move right along to the Power Rangers, where today I decided to fight Brown because I have super effective damage against Baltoy. Now, moving on to just a little bit of rambling, if you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now back to the battle in hand, and I defeat Baltoy, which is definitely a huge mistake, and after the Hoothoot goes down, I sit on the screen for a second realizing what I've just done, so I have to go back into it again, wasting just a little bit of time, though the extra experience could be nice. But anyway, since the Baltoy is actually a higher level, whoever I get is going to be a bit higher level, and I roll Golduck, which is pretty good, though I might have liked Tentacruel here just so it evolves quicker, but Golduck is still a really good Pokemon because it has 80 HP, 82 attack, 78 defense, 95 special attack, 80 special defense, and 85 speed, making it a solid well-rounder. And through level up it gets almost nothing actually. It gets normal type moves and Confusion at level 16, which is alright, but Hydro Pump is way down the line at 58. Luckily its TM moveset is okay with solid fighting, water, and ice type moves, but honestly I was not expecting to see it that barren. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our Golduck in particular, which has a quirky nature, which is once again a neutral nature, and it gets the damp ability preventing self-destruct or explosion, which unfortunately only applies to a Pineco on level 1 of Mount Battle, and by level 17 I gave it Scratch, Water Sport, Tail Whip, and Confusion. So with that, let's go and move on. And at level 16, Espeon gets Confusion, which I teach over Sand Attack, and then I pick up the Spinnerack for our next Pokemon. So let's go ahead and give the wheel another spin, and all that's left is Tentacruel and Slowking, and for my final spin, I get Slowking, which is definitely a very good Pokemon with 95 HP, 75 attack, 80 defense, 100 special attack, 110 special defense, and 30 speed. And through level up it gets normal, water, and psychic type moves, and luckily it does get the move Psychic at level 48. Through TMs it gets access to quite a few different types: Ice, Ground, Psychic, Ghost, Fighting, Fire, which gives it a lot of versatility, and more importantly, it's the only Pokemon that can actually learn Earthquake on our team, so it is going to be quite nice for speeding up some fights at the end of the game. With that being said, let's go and move on. And we have a Slowking with an adamant nature, raising its attack but lowering its special attack, which is really quite unfortunate. However, that will make Earthquake hit a little harder, I suppose. It has the Own Tempo ability, which prevents it from being confused. That is pretty nice throughout the game. And by level 14, it has Curse, Tackle, Yawn, and Growl. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. And I pick up the Shadow Numble here for the Charcoal item, and so that I can get my final Pokemon, the Tentacruel line. Starting with Tentacruel, it has 40 HP, 40 attack, 35 defense, 50 special attack, 100 special defense at 70 speed, and when it evolves, it'll have 80 HP, 70 attack, 65 defense, 80 special attack, 120 special defense, and 100 speed. And between them, they get access to normal poison and water type moves through level up. However, they do also get Ice Beam and, strangely enough, Giga Drain. And also, I didn't realize that Tentacruel was so fast at 100 speed. Also, the reason I'm starting with Tentacruel instead of Tentacruel with this line is because it actually does have the Forehead Gem in the pre-evolution, whereas all the other Pokemon don't. Anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to our Tentacruel in particular, which has a serious nature, which is yet again a neutral nature. And it has the Clear Body ability, which prevents stat reductions, which is going to be very nice throughout the game. And it gets Poison Sting, Supersonic, and Constrict by level 14. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to level 15 when Slowking learns Water Gun, which I teach over Growl, and then I go into the battle against Laverna. She leads with the Love Disc and a Beautifly, and right away I lead with Espeon and Ampharos. That way I can take down Beautifly right away, and I try to go for a flinch on Love Disc, which unfortunately doesn't happen. After Beautifly goes down, she sends out Roselia. I go for Confusion into it, doing super effective damage, though unfortunately it does survive with just a little bit of HP. Go for Thundershock to take down the Love Disc, and that sends out our final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Now, Roselia really isn't a threat anymore because its Leech Seed won't get passed on to anyone further down the line, so I just take it down, and then I move on to Delcatty, who is going to take a few hits to take down. It's faster than Ampharos. Thundershock takes it down about a third. Go for Bite, hoping for a flinch, but it's able to attack through. Luckily it didn't hit Espeon, and so I'm able to finish off with Thundershock, and we beat Laverna first attempt. Now, of course, you can't have a Forehead Gem Pokemon video without the obligatory Mirabee. How are you doing on this exceptional day, Mirabee? Well, as always, it's great to see you, but we actually want to pick up your Voltorb for the Magnet item to raise electric type damage by 10%. At level 20, Slowking gets the move Confusion, which I teach over Curse, and then at level 23, Espeon gets Quick Attack, which I teach over Tail Whip. I pick up the Ralts for the Twisted Spoon item, raising psychic type damage by 10%, and then I go over to the Realgam Tower to go pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and while I'm here, I'm also going to pick up the TM for Thunder, after figuring out where it is in the menu. I should really just know what the number is at this point. I keep reading the description down at the bottom instead of looking by number, but anyway, now that I have Hidden Power, I teach that to Espeon to give it some other attacking type, and I'm glad I did because it turns out to be Hidden Power Ice, and not just any Hidden Power Ice. It turns out to be 70 base power, which I'm pretty sure is perfect. And Tentacruel gets Hidden Power Water at 36 base power. Not great, but it is something for it. I pick up the Swinub for the Never Melt Ice item to raise Ice type damage by 10%. And then I go into the battle against Snaddle. He leads with the Quagsire and a Lantern, and I lead with Espeon and Slowking. And I go for Confusion into the Lantern right away, dealing a decent amount of damage. Shockwave hits Espeon, not really doing too much, and Rock Tomb lowers its speed. Go for Confusion again, taking Lantern down to half, so I will be able to finish it off this turn. Unfortunately, Espeon gets taken down to 7 HP. The Quagsire decides not to target it and misses with Slam. I finish off the Lantern. He sends out his next Pokemon, a Shadow Lunatone, and luckily it's weak to Bite, and it does well over half. It sets up Shadow Sky, Ice Punch finishes off Espeon, and so I decide to send out Ampharos because it does well against the rest of his team, not counting the Quagsire. Unfortunately, Lunatone does survive on a little bit of HP from Water Gun, so I do need to take it out the next turn, but Lunatone actually outspeeds and hits us both with Shadow Wave, not dealing as much damage as I thought it would though. I take it down, and then out comes Cast Form. Unfortunately, Ampharos' speed is lowered, and there's no way Slowking is outspeeding the Cast Form. So unfortunately, it will probably act first next turn. It hits a Weather Ball, dealing a little bit of damage. Go for Thunder Shock into it, taking it down to low yellow. And now Slowking should be able to finish it off with Confusion. It does, and he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Metang. Now, unfortunately, neither of my Pokemon currently outspeed Metang, and that is a bit of an issue because Ampharos is one of my better Pokemon for dealing with it. So I decide to swap into Tentacruel, knowing full well it'll probably get taken down very quickly. I go for Water Gun, which gets a crit, taking Metang down to half, and Quagsire misses a slam. Now that Tentacruel is out, Metang should see a one-shot with Confusion, so it goes for it and takes down the Tentacruel, and I send out Ampharos once again now that its speed has been reset. I did get a little bit lucky there with the Rock Tomb missing, though. I hadn't really considered that one. But anyway, I go for Thunder Shock to finish off the Metang, and then all that's left is the Quagsire, which Confusion does a little bit too. Ice Punch does unfortunately take down Ampharos, but at this point it doesn't really matter. I send out Golduck because I may as well get the experience on it. Of course, it's doing very little damage because of how low level it is. But I go for another Confusion. I swap into Persian just to get a little bit of experience on it as well. And I finish off Quagsire, beating Snaddle on the first attempt. Now moving on to the SS Libra, where I pick up the TM for Flamethrower, which I decide to teach over Tackle on Slowking, and then at the same time I teach Ice Beam to Tentacruel. Speaking of, at level 19, Tentacruel gets Acid, which I teach over Poison Sting, and then at level 30, Espeon gets Swift. Not a great move, but it can be nice. At level 30, Ampharos gets Thunder Punch, which I teach over Thunder Shock. I teach Espeon Psychic with the TM, and at level 25, Tentacruel gets Bubble Beam, which I decide to teach over Hidden Power. Now moving into the battle against Gonzap, he leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and I decide to use Espeon and Ampharos. That way, whenever Electrode attacks Ampharos, it's just going to go for Sonic Boom, which luckily it does, but unfortunately Psychic isn't able to take it down in a single turn, so I do risk getting paralyzed by Spark. Luckily, it just decides to go for Sonic Boom again. I'm able to take down the Nuzleaf with a Hidden Power Ice, and then out comes Vileplume. Thunder Punch finishes off Electrode. Though, in hindsight, maybe it was a bit risky because, unfortunately, Ampharos gets paralyzed due to its static ability. It sends out Whiscash, and I take down Vileplume in a single Psychic, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Skarmory. But it is swiftly dealt with by Ampharos taking it down in a single hit, and all that's left is the Whiscash. I decide to swap out Ampharos because it can't deal any damage here. I go for Psychic, taking it down to low yellow, and unfortunately Tentacruel gets taken down by Hyper Beam. Well, if that's the case, I may as well have Ampharos get as much experience as possible, so I finish it off with another Psychic, and we beat Gonzap. At level 30, Tentacruel evolves into Tentacruel, and then at the top of the pyramid, I go ahead and teach Slowking Earthquake, and then at the same time, I teach Ampharos Thunderbolt over Thunder Punch, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and I lead with Tentacruel and Ampharos. I go for Bubble Beam, not really doing that much damage, but hopefully enough for Thunderbolt to take it down, though it might not have needed that chip damage anyway. Out comes Slowking. I go for another Bubble Beam to nearly take down Lairon. Thunderbolt takes Slowking down to very low health as well, and Tentacruel goes down to a crit Earthquake. Very unfortunate, but the Earthquake also takes down Slowking. I send out Espeon, and the correct choice here is to double into Ursaring to take it down. However, I decide to take down Lairon and paralyze the Ursaring. This is clearly the wrong choice because this Ursaring has the Guts ability, so now he's hitting twice as hard. But anyway, he sends out his Shadow Primeape. Slash nearly takes down Espeon in a single hit. I go for Psychic to take down the Primeape right away, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Hypno. Once again, I decide to leave the Ursaring completely alone and go for Thunderbolt into Hypno, dealing almost half. And Espeon goes down. I send out Slowking, and then I go for Flamethrower and Thunderbolt to finish off the Hypno. Hypno goes for Shadow Down, which is definitely the worst thing to see because now my defense is lowered by 2 stages. But Hypno goes down, and all that's left is that Ursaring. Ampharos goes down to a Brick Break, and I decide to send out Persian. And once again, I make a mistake. I decide to go for Payday, expecting it to deal more damage than it does. In hindsight, really should have just gone for Bite here, hoping for a flinch. But Persian goes down right away, and I send out Golduck. I go for another Flamethrower and Confusion, which Confusion does almost nothing. Flamethrower does get it to yellow, and it does get paralyzed for the first time. And luckily I'm able to get past this fight, though I definitely made this fight much harder than it needed to be. Anyway, moving on, now at the Tutor Lady, I go ahead and pick up the move Thunder Wave for Slowking, Body Slam for Persian, and I teach Light Screen to Espeon over Swift. And now for the moment that I've been waiting for this entire run, and that is capturing this Golduck and replacing our current one. Unfortunately, our Golduck has just fallen very behind in levels, and this one has Waterfall and Brick Break. Anyway, with that, we go into the battle against Lovrina. She leads with the Gardevoir and the Gorbis, and I go with Espeon and Ampharos. Go for Thunderbolt to take down the Gorbis right away, and I deal a little bit of damage to the Gardevoir with Bite. I go for Psychic to take down Roselia in a single hit, and then he sends out a Shadow Farfetch'd. Gardevoir uses Attract on Espeon, though luckily it doesn't end up mattering because Ampharos takes it down with Thunderbolt, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. And because I have Hidden Power Ice, it shouldn't be an issue at all. But I actually decided to swap into Tentacruel. I'm not sure if I just forgot my Hidden Power type or if I just wanted experience on Tentacruel, but it shouldn't end up mattering too much. I swap into Golduck to lower its Shadow Gauge, and Ice Beam takes it down to half. Altaria gets frozen, and one more Ice Beam takes it down. So with that, we beat Lovrina on the first attempt, and then I head back over to a Gate Village to go purify Golduck, and our new Golduck has a timid nature, raising its speed but lowering its attack, which is alright. Anyway, at the top of the volcano, I run into Snaddle once again. He has a Quagsire and a Metang this time, and I lead with Espeon and Slowking. Right away, I go for Psychic into Quagsire. Unfortunately, it's not a one-shot, and Slowking goes for Flamethrower, which also isn't a one-shot, though luckily neither Thunder Punch nor Quagsire's Body Slam paralyzed. So I take down the Quagsire, and then he sends out Scizor. And luckily it is 4 times weak to fire, so Flamethrower takes it down in a single hit. And then he sends out his first Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Solrock, and it's just going to go for Shadow Sky on the first turn, so even if I don't take it down right away, that's alright. Bite takes it down to half, and I get a flinch. Flamethrower finishes off Metang, and then he sends out Cast Form. And so I finish off the Solrock with Bite, and I decide to just go ahead and Thunder Wave the oncoming Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. That way it's slower than all my Pokemon for sure, and I'll be able to take it down hopefully a bit easier. I go for Bite and a Flamethrower into the Cast Form. Bite doesn't quite do half, and I go for Flamethrower, which also doesn't quite do half, but luckily Cast Form does get burnt. Starmie finishes off Slowking, and I send out Ampharos, who is definitely faster than the Starmie now. And I finish off Cast Form with Psychic, and Thunderbolt takes down Starmie. So with that, we have a pretty easy Snaddle fight. Now moving on, and right before the next fight, I decide to teach Persian Rain Dance, and I also teach Ampharos Thunder over Tackle. Now moving on to the battle against Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and I send out Tentacruel and Golduck, though looking at this now, it looks like I messed up sending Golduck out and it was supposed to be Persian. Swallow sets up Shadow Sky, and Alakazam hits a Thunder Punch, dealing quite a bit to Persian. Go for Ice Beam into Swallow, which isn't a one-shot, though luckily it does get a freeze. And I'm really hoping Persian is faster than Alakazam so it can set up Rain Dance. But unfortunately, Alakazam does still outspeed and takes it down right away. So I decide to send out Espeon, and I go for Ice Beam into the Alakazam, dealing a little bit of damage. Hopefully Bite is now in range to finish it off though, but just to be safe I decide to double into Alakazam. Swallow is defrosted and takes down Espeon in a single hit. I send out Ampharos, and Alakazam it goes for Psychic into Tentacruel, taking it down, which is honestly a bit surprising because Tentacruel does have a really good special defense stat. But anyway, I send out Slowking in its place. And unfortunately, none of my Pokemon are faster than Swallow, so I tried to go for Thunder Wave, but it just goes for Shadow Half, bringing everyone down below half. Slowking goes down, I send out Golduck, and at this point there's really no way to actually win the battle. However, I do take down Swallow, which is good for the experience, and then he sends out Kingdra. And since I'm already fighting a losing battle, I may as well play it as risky as possible to get as much experience as possible. I go for Thunderbolt into the Alakazam to try to take it down. Luckily, I do survive on 1 HP, but Double Edge does take me down. But Kingdra does get paralyzed, so that could be something. I go for Waterfall into Alakazam. Thunder Punch surprisingly doesn't take me down. Alakazam goes down, and then he sends out Heracross, able to attack one more turn before going down to Rock Tomb. Honestly, a valiant effort by Golduck. Now moving on to the third attempt, and this time I've decided to go all in on the rain strategy. Swallow sets up Shadow Sky, and I'm able to set up Rain Dance right after, which completely negates it, and Thunder is able to hit 100% of the time now. Unfortunately, Alakazam is still a real threat because it does outspeed both of my Pokemon, so I try to go for Body Slam, and I forget that Kingdra actually has Swift Swim, so it outspeeds everything, and takes down Persian with a single Hydro Pump. I use Thunder into Alakazam, which doesn't quite take it down, though I do think that might just be a range. I decide to go for Thunder into Kingdra to try to take it down on this turn, and luckily it does miss the Hydro Pump. Ampharos survives with 13 HP from another Psychic from Alakazam, and then he sends out Heracross. Thunder doesn't quite take down Kingdra, though it does paralyze, which means that I can finish it off this turn, and I go for Psychic to take down the Heracross. Out comes his second Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Electabuzz, and Thunder takes down Kingdra, sending out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Snorlax. Now hopefully Electabuzz just goes for Shadow Mist to lower our evasiveness instead of going for Shadow Storm. And I go for Psychic into Snorlax, and I decide to paralyze the Electabuzz. Luckily it does just decide to go for Shadow Mist. And so even though one of my Pokemon is guaranteed to get taken down by Snorlax, it's actually pretty good for me because it does have its HP. So I send out Golduck now, and the rain fades away. I go for Brick Break into Snorlax, dealing quite a bit of damage, but not enough to take it down. Psychic takes Electabuzz down below half, and Espeon goes down to another Shadow End. I send out Slowking, and Electabuzz just goes for another Shadow Mist. And so I'm able to take down the Snorlax this turn with another Brick Break, and I go for Earthquake to take down the Electabuzz. So with that, we beat Ardos on the third attempt, but still pretty good, I'd say. Now moving on to Gorgon, he leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring this time, and I go for Thunderbolt and Light Screen right away. Thunderbolt is not quite enough to take down Slowking, though that's definitely a range. But because of that, Slowking is able to use Earthquake and deal quite a bit to both of my Pokemon. Ursaring gets taken down to low yellow with Psychic, and Slowking finished off with Thunderbolt. At level 42, I decide not to teach Light Screen, and then he sends out Aggron. Ursaring goes for Slash, taking Ampharos down to 6. I go for Psychic to finish off the Ursaring, which he sends out Walrein. And I decide to use Thunderbolt to take down the Aggron in a single hit, and then he sends out his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Poliwrath. Now it's just going to set up Shadow Sky on the first turn, so while it can be dangerous, it's not currently that bad. And it's able to survive a Psychic. I get a crit taking Walrein down with Thunderbolt though, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Mr. Mime. And Mr. Mime benefits heavily from the Shadow Sky because it makes its Shadow Storms hit extremely hard. But luckily I do have a counter for it. I take down Poliwrath with Psychic, and then because Persian is faster than Mr. Mime, I set up Rain, which weakens the power of Shadow Storm back to normal. And so I'm able to take him down without too much issue. Though, with that being said, I guess Light Screen was up, so that was still quite a bit of damage. But after 3 bites, Mr. Mime is taken down, and we beat Gorgon on the first attempt. I teach Protect to Golduck, Ampharos, and Tentacruel before the fight against Eldis. He leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and I lead with Ampharos and Tentacruel. And right away, I go for Bubble Beam into Manectric, which doesn't really do all that much damage, but I paralyzed Manectric so it's no longer a speedy threat. Unfortunately, before it got paralyzed, it was able to set up Shadow Sky. I decided to Protect on this turn to make sure that Ninjask isn't going to hit either of my Pokemon. And then, because it's stuck into using Dig, it's not really a threat right now. Go for Bubble Beam, taking Manectric down to half, and Thunderbolt. It takes it down to the tiniest sliver. Luckily, it does get fully paralyzed this turn though. And after a bit of thought, I decided to go for a double Protect once again to avoid the Ninjask. And while it is great avoiding the Ninjask, it also stalls out the Fruity Pebbles as well, so hopefully some of his Pokemon later down the line won't be as threatening. I go for Bubble Beam to finish off the Manectric, and Thunderbolt to start dealing damage to his next Pokemon. Manectric goes down, and he sends out Shadow Salamence. And even though it's only neutral, it still does a decent amount of damage. Though I'm really hoping that Tentacruel is actually faster than Salamence, otherwise it might not be able to take it down before getting taken down itself. But I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam into Salamence, and it does in fact outspeed Tentacruel, but I get taken down to 1 HP, and Thunderbolt finishes it off. So now he sends out Flygon, and unfortunately I don't really have anything to deal damage to Flygon with Ampharos, so I need to swap it out, but I really don't want to get hit by Ninjask, so I decide to stall a turn. And then I swap into Golduck, and then I go for Ice Beam into Flygon. Unfortunately, it does outspeed and takes Tentacruel down, but I swap into Persian, and that's so I can set up Rain Dance once again. That way his final Pokemon should hopefully go down very quickly. A crit Dig does nearly take Persian down though in a single hit, and Flygon does finish it off with Double Edge, but that's alright because it got the Rain up and that's all it really needed to do. Flygon gets taken down to half HP by Waterfall and its own recoil, and that actually works in my favor because once again it hurts itself and Waterfall takes it down. He then sends out his next Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Marowak, and it is extremely deadly, so I need to take it down as soon as possible. I take down Ninjask with Thunderbolt, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. And with Lapras out, I go for Thunder into it. Waterfall does take down Marowak in a single hit, and Thunder takes down Lapras in a single hit. So a pretty easy first attempt. Now moving on to the big box legendary, Shadow Lugia. And right away I go for Thunder and Rain Dance, but unfortunately Lugia does take down Persian in a single hit. So it is a 70% chance for Thunder to hit, and luckily it does, taking it down to half. So I go for Bite and Thunderbolt to take it down, but not before Ampharos gets taken down very low with another Shadow Blast. So I now move on to the final boss of the game, who leads with a Shadow Moltres and Rhydon. Now unfortunately this battle does start with a 50% chance of failure because Rhydon could have Lightning Rod, though luckily on the first attempt it doesn't. Thunder takes Moltres down to a minuscule amount of health that luckily Slowking is able to finish off, and then he sends out his next Pokemon, an Exeggutor. Ampharos really can't do anything here, so I decide to swap into Golduck, and even if Golduck gets taken down, it's alright, this is a first attempt, so it doesn't really matter too much. And that comes to pass because Rhydon takes it down a single hit with Shadow End, though that is good to know that Golduck will go down to a single Shadow End. I paralyze the Exeggutor, and then I go for Bubble Beam into Rhydon, which takes it down to half, and Tentacruel at level 38 gets Barrier, which I decide not to teach, and then he sends out Tauros, which I decide to paralyze right away because it is very fast, and this should hopefully give me a way to take it down before it sets up Shadow Sky, but unfortunately Exeggutor takes down Slowking with a Shadow End. I send out Ampharos once again, and I go for Bubble Beam and Thunderbolt into Tauros to take it down. Bubble Beam really doesn't do that much damage, and Tauros does go down to Thunderbolt. Then he sends out Articuno, which is absolutely going to outspeed both of my Pokemon, so I decide to go ahead and go for Protect and Thunder Wave. But unfortunately Articuno decides to set up Shadow Sky, so now everything's going to be doing a lot more damage. I go for Bubble Beam into it, and also Thunderbolt, which Bubble Beam does almost nothing, and Thunderbolt takes it down into very low yellow. Ampharos goes down unfortunately though, and I send out Espeon, and Exeggutor luckily gets paralyzed again, and at this point I should be able to take down Articuno with a Psychic, which it does with a crit, but I don't think that was necessary, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, Zapdos. Ice Beam does a decent amount to it, and it gets frozen, and Shadow End takes down Tentacruel. Okay, well, that might actually be alright. I go for Bite to finish off the Exeggutor, and as long as Zapdos doesn't thaw, okay, I go for Psychic, taking it down to yellow, and it defrosts and takes me down. Okay, well that's a bit unfortunate, but it's good to know that even an unprepared team can actually take it down. At least that's what I thought, because here we are now on attempt number 5, and I hadn't really considered the amount of luck I got in the first attempt, because Exeggutor did get paralyzed 3 times in a row, and also miss a Shadow End. Now on this one, I do actually have a good team and a solid strategy, but as always with Greevil, it does come down to a little bit of luck. Now moving on, the current strategy is simple. I set up Rain Dance, which I was able to do on the first turn with Persian. Luckily Persian went down pretty quickly, so I'm able to get out Ampharos onto the field and spam Thunders like there's no tomorrow. And I also have Slowking out, that way whenever the Tauros comes out, I can paralyze it right away to prevent it from setting up Shadow Sky. Now of course this strategy does rely on Exeggutor not hitting all that often, but luckily it's not too bad. Thunder's able to take down Tauros in a single hit, and then he sends out Articuno. And I need to paralyze Articuno right away as well, because it does outspeed Ampharos as well. And luckily Exeggutor is being very kind, go for a Thunder to nearly take down Articuno. Ampharos does unfortunately go down, and so I send out Espeon, go for Flamethrower to take down the Exeggutor, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, the Zapdos once again, but not before I deny Slowking Swagger. Articuno goes for Shadow Chill, doing quite a bit of damage to Slowking, and now I need to go for Thunder Wave to slow down Zapdos, and Psychic to finish off the Articuno, and Zapdos hits a Shadow Bolt, taking Slowking all the way down to 18. It's able to get off Thunder Wave, and now it's just up to these two to finish them off. I decide to go ahead and set up Light Screen just to be safe though. Go for Flamethrower, Shadow Bolt takes down Slowking, and I send out Golduck. Now to go for Psychic and Waterfall into it to deal as much damage as possible. Psychic takes it down to yellow, and Waterfall takes it down to red. It gets fully paralyzed, and Psychic finishes it off. So with that, we beat Greevil on the 5th attempt. So how well did the 4-head gem Pokemon do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 10 hours, 9 minutes, and 24 seconds, with Espeon at level 45, Persian at 39, Golduck at 37, Slowking at 42, Tentacruel at 39, and Ampharos at level 45. And they had 7 faints throughout the game, 6 of those to bosses, and 1 loss to a random trainer. So it's very clear that these Pokemon are incredibly good together, so let's go ahead and go over the positives and negatives. I guess I'll start with the negatives this time, and there's really only a couple I can think of. The first really isn't even the Pokemon's fault per se, it's just the fact that it's a full team video, so experience gets spread around, and some of these Pokemon level up slower than others, so some of them just kind of fall behind because it just takes too much experience, or it's just not worth leveling them up at the moment because the future fights don't really require them. The other small issue is that there is a decent amount of TM overlap, so unfortunately some Pokemon would like to learn a move, but it's just better to give it to another, either to make them more relevant or just because they're stronger. With that being said, the positives heavily outweigh the negatives. Every single one of the Pokemon on the team is extremely good, or at least has the potential to be extremely good. On top of that, there's a good mix of fast and slow Pokemon, defensive and offensive Pokemon, and a huge variety of TMs that each of these Pokemon can learn, as well as a good amount of type variety in their actual typings, which allows for a lot of switching opportunities. So they find themselves at the top of the A- tier, with their only real downside being that it's a little slow to get through the game. So with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye.